I stood there in the pouring rain, my clothes clinging to my body, my gray hair plastered to my face, watching through the window as my husband of 40 years sat comfortably in our living room, sipping his scotch. He'd locked me out, not by accident, not in anger, but deliberately, coldly, to teach me what he called a lesson about gratitude. In that moment, shivering on my own front porch, I couldn't have known that someone was watching. Someone who would change everything. Someone who would help me discover that the cruelest betrayals sometimes lead to the most unexpected redemption. My name is Margaret Thompson, though everyone's always called me Maggie. I'm 67 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was Richard Thompson's wife, mother to 3 wonderful children. The woman who kept the home fires burning while my husband built his real estate empire. The woman who smiled at charity galas and hosted dinner parties and never, ever complained. I thought I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. How foolish I was! It was a Tuesday morning in late September when the first crack appeared in my carefully constructed world. I remember it was Tuesday, 'cause that was the day I always did the grocery shopping, planned the week's meals, and made sure Richard's favorite shirts were pressed for his business meetings. Tuesdays were predictable, safe, or at least they used to be. I'd just come back from the supermarket, my arms loaded with bags, when I noticed Richard's study door was open. Now, Richard was very particular about his study. It was his sanctuary, he called it, the place where he made the deals that kept us comfortable. I wasn't forbidden from entering, exactly, but there was an understanding. That was his space, his world. I had the kitchen, the garden, the rest of the house. He had his study, but that morning the door stood wide open, and Richard's car was gone from the driveway. He must have left in a hurry for an early meeting. I set the groceries down in the kitchen and walked back toward the study, intending simply to close the door. I'm not a snoop. I've never been the kind of wife who goes through her husband's things. After 40 years of marriage, I thought we had trust. I thought we had a lot of things. As I reached for the door handle, my eyes fell on Richard's desk. Normally it was immaculate, everything in its place, but this morning papers were scattered across the surface. One folder sat open, documents spilling out like secrets that couldn't be contained any longer. I shouldn't have looked. I should have just closed that door and gone about my day. But I saw my name, Margaret Ann Thompson. There it was, typed in bold letters at the top of a legal document. My heart did a little flutter. The kind you get when you think maybe your husband has been planning a surprise, perhaps an anniversary gift, or a special trip. We'd been talking about taking that cruise to Alaska. Maybe he'd gone ahead and booked it. I stepped into the study, just close enough to read the header of the document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I read those words 3 times before they made sense. Dissolution. Such a clinical word. Such a cold, sterile way to describe the ending of a life built together. Of children raised, of meals shared, of nights lying side by side, of promises made at an altar 40 years ago. My hands were shaking as I picked up the document. There were others beneath it. Financial statements showing accounts I'd never heard of. Properties listed under Richard's name alone, though I could have sworn we owned everything jointly. Correspondence with attorneys. Dated back 6 months. 6 months. While I'd been planning our retirement, choosing paint colors for the beach house we'd talked about buying, Richard had been planning this. I sank into his leather desk chair, the one he'd special ordered from Italy. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. Page after page, I read through the careful dismantling of our marriage. There were notes in Richard's handwriting, his sharp, angular script that I used to find so distinguished. Move offshore accounts by Q3. Transfer property titles before filing. Minimize community asset exposure. I wasn't a person to him in these notes. I was an exposure, a liability to be minimized. There was more. An email printed out, correspondence with his attorney. Regarding your concern about spousal support, it read, if we can document a pattern of voluntary non-contribution to household income, we can argue for minimal or no alimony. Your wife's choice to work only part-time significantly weakens her claim to your earnings. My choice to work part-time, as if it had been some selfish indulgence. As if I hadn't made that choice so I could be there when the children came home from school, so I could drive them to soccer practice and piano lessons and help them with their homework while Richard worked late. So I could host the dinners with his business partners that he said were so important for his career. So I could be the wife he needed me to be. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the morning sun to shift across the room, casting different shadows on those terrible papers. Long enough for the ice cream in the grocery bags to start melting in the kitchen. Long enough for my whole life to rearrange itself in my mind, every memory now tainted with this new knowledge. The phone rang, making me jump. I let it go to voicemail. Richard's voice filled the study, confident and warm, the voice he used with clients and business associates. "Maggie, sweetheart, I'm going to be late tonight. Don't wait up. There's a deal I need to close." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Love you. Love you." I sat there listening to those words echo in the empty study, and for the first time in 40 years of marriage, I wondered if Richard Thompson had ever loved me at all, or if I'd just been part of his portfolio, an asset that had appreciated for a time, and was now ready to be liquidated. I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, every paper in its place, the folder positioned just so. Richard couldn't know that I knew. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what to do. I'd spent 40 years being the perfect wife, the accommodating partner, the woman who never made waves. Maybe it was time to learn how to make a storm. But I had no idea what that would look like. I'd never fought for anything in my life. I'd never had to. I was Maggie Thompson, the woman who smiled and nodded and made everything nice for everyone else. The woman who'd let her own dreams get folded up and put away, one by one, like winter clothes you think you'll need again someday, but never quite get around to unpacking. I went back to the kitchen and put away the groceries, moving on autopilot. The ice cream was ruined, melted and refrozen into a crystallized mess. I threw it away. Threw away the receipt too, so Richard wouldn't see the waste. Even now, even knowing what I knew, I was still trying to be the perfect wife. Some habits I would learn. Die harder than love. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions of being Mrs. Richard Thompson, but it was like I was watching myself from the outside. There I was, making Richard's coffee exactly the way he liked it, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. There I was, asking him about his day, listening to him talk about property deals and difficult clients. There I was, sleeping next to him every night, feeling the warmth of his body beside me, and wondering how long he'd been planning to leave. I became a detective in my own home. Not in an obvious way. I was too careful for that. But I started paying attention to things I'd overlooked for years. The way Richard would step out of the room to take certain phone calls. The way he'd started going to the gym 5 days a week, suddenly concerned about his appearance at 70 years old. The way he'd look at me sometimes across the dinner table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Impatience, contempt, or just the look of a man counting down the days until he could be free. I kept waiting for him to tell me. Surely after 40 years he owed me that much. A conversation, an explanation, something more than legal documents left carelessly on a desk. But Richard said nothing. He played the role of devoted husband as expertly as I played the role of devoted wife. We were both actors now, performing a marriage that existed only on the surface. It was during this time that our new neighbors moved in. The house next door had been empty for months after old Mr. Patterson passed away. His children had finally sold it to a single woman, which had caused a bit of talk in our neighborhood. Our street was mostly retired couples and a few families with young children. A single professional woman in her 40s was something different. I first met Alina Rodriguez on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garden, tending to my roses, the one thing I'd kept for myself over the years. My roses were beautiful, the envy of the neighborhood. I'd spent years cultivating them, learning their needs, understanding which ones thrived in shade and which demanded full sun. They were mine in a way nothing else in my life had been for a long time. Those are absolutely stunning. I looked up to see a woman standing at the fence line between our properties. She was striking rather than conventionally pretty. Sharp features, intelligent dark eyes, black hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She wore jeans and a Georgetown Law sweatshirt, and she was carrying a box labeled kitchen. "Thank you," I said, straightening up and brushing the dirt from my gardening gloves. "I'm Maggie Thompson. Welcome to the neighborhood, Elena Rodriguez." She set down the box and came closer to the fence, genuinely interested in the roses. "How did you get them to bloom so late in the season? I've never been able to keep anything alive for more than a month." We talked for 20 minutes about roses, about the neighborhood, about the weather. She told me she was an attorney, specializing in immigration law, and had just made partner at her firm. She'd wanted a house with a yard, a place to finally put down roots after years of apartment living. She was funny and direct, with a laugh that was completely unself-conscious. I liked her immediately. Richard didn't. I met our new neighbor today. I mentioned that evening over dinner. I'd made his favorite, pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade rolls. I'd been making his favorites a lot lately, some part of me still trying to fix whatever was broken, still trying to be good enough. Oh, Richard didn't look up from his plate. Elena Rodriguez. She's a lawyer. Very accomplished. She just made partner at. What kind of lawyer? Now he looked up, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. Immigration law, she said. Something flickered across Richard's face. Disapproval, maybe, or distaste. One of those bleeding heart types who help illegals stay in the country. Richard, that's not. I don't want you getting too friendly with her, Maggie. We don't know anything about her. Single woman, living alone, working in that kind of law. She's probably one of those radical feminists. I stared at my husband. When had he become this person? Or had he always been this way, and I'd simply been too busy being agreeable to notice? She seemed very nice, I said quietly. I'm sure she did, they always do. Richard returned to his dinner, the conversation over as far as he was concerned. But something had shifted in me during those weeks of pretending. Some small, buried part of myself was waking up, and it was tired of being quiet. Her being nice isn't an act, Richard. Some people are genuinely kind. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw surprise in his eyes. Maggie Thompson didn't contradict him. Maggie Thompson didn't have opinions that differed from his. Maggie Thompson certainly didn't use that tone of voice. I'm just saying, he said carefully, his voice taking on that patronizing quality I'd heard him use with incompetent employees, that you should be careful. You're too trusting, Maggie. You always have been. People take advantage of that. The irony of those words coming from him almost made me laugh. But I swallowed it down along with everything else I couldn't say. Not yet. I still didn't know what to do, how to protect myself. I'd called a lawyer myself the week before, but the consultation had left me feeling hopeless. Without documentation of your contributions to the marriage and the household, and given your limited employment history, the attorney had said gently, your position isn't strong. Especially if he's been moving assets, you might want to consider a settlement. A settlement. As if 40 years of my life, 3 children raised, countless dinners with his business partners, hundreds of little sacrifices, could be settled with a check and a signature. The following Tuesday, I ran into Elena again. I was bringing in the mail when I saw her struggling with a large package on her front porch. Without thinking, I crossed the lawn to help her. Oh, Maggie, thank you. She was breathless, laughing at herself. I ordered a bookshelf online and completely forgot how terrible I am at lifting heavy things. That's what I get for skipping the gym for 3 months straight. Together we maneuvered the box into her living room. The house was still mostly unpacked, boxes everywhere, but I could see she had good taste. Modern but warm, lots of books, art that looked like it had been collected from travels rather than bought to match the sofa. Can I get you some coffee? Tea? Elena asked. It's the least I can do, and I'm desperate for a break from unpacking. I should have said no. Richard wouldn't like it. But Richard was doing a lot of things I didn't like, and maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped organizing my entire life around his preferences. Coffee would be lovely, I said. We sat in her kitchen, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and talked. Really talked. Elena was easy to talk to, the kind of person who listened with her whole attention, who asked follow-up questions, who seemed genuinely interested in what you had to say. We talked about her work. She told me about a case she'd just won, helping a family stay together. We talked about my roses, about the neighborhood, about the book she was reading. And then, somehow, we were talking about marriage. I was engaged once, Elena said, stirring her coffee, back in law school. He was brilliant, ambitious, had everything planned out, including me. I was supposed to be part of his plan, the supportive wife, the perfect hostess for his political career. He had it all mapped out. What happened? I asked. I woke up one morning and realized I'd stopped being Elena Rodriguez somewhere along the way. I'd become this person he wanted me to be, and I didn't even recognize myself anymore. She looked at me with those sharp, kind eyes. So I gave him back the ring. Hardest thing I ever did, but also the most important. I felt something crack inside my chest. Do you regret it? Not for a single day. I regret the time I spent trying to be someone I wasn't. But leaving, that was the moment I started being free. She paused, then added, I know that's not everyone's story. Some people find themselves in their marriages, But I needed to find myself on my own first. I wanted to tell her everything. About the documents, about Richard's plans, about how lost I felt. But the words wouldn't come. I'd spent too many years keeping up appearances, protecting Richard's image, being the perfect wife who never complained. You can't undo 40 years of conditioning in a single conversation over coffee. But Alina saw something. I don't know what I revealed in my face, but she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. If you ever need anything, Maggie, anything at all, I'm right next door. Okay, okay, I whispered. I left her house feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because for the first time in weeks I'd felt like myself, not Richard's wife, not the children's mother, but Maggie, just Maggie. Heavier because I'd glimpsed something I'd given up without even realizing it. My own life. My own choices. My own voice. That night, Richard came home later than usual. His tie was loosened, his face flushed. He'd been drinking, not drunk, but enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath when he kissed my cheek in greeting. "Did you eat?" I asked. "Had something at the club." He loosened his tie further, heading for the stairs. "I'm exhausted. Going to turn in early. Richard, wait." He stopped, turned. Something in my voice had caught his attention. "Can we talk? About us, about the future?" For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Fear. Guilt. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Sure, sweetheart, but not tonight, okay? Tomorrow. I promise we'll sit down and talk about retirement plans, the Alaska cruise, all of it. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow." But tomorrow would come sooner than either of us expected, and it would arrive on a storm. The rain started on a Thursday evening in early October. It wasn't the gentle autumn rain we usually got, the kind that made everything smell like earth and dying leaves. This was violent, angry, the kind of storm that tears branches from trees and sends people hurrying inside to safety. I should have been safe inside, too. I should have been in my warm, comfortable home, maybe reading by the fire or watching one of my shows. But instead I was standing on my own front porch, locked out, soaked to the bone, while my husband sat in our living room with a glass of scotch, teaching me what he called a lesson. It had started so ordinarily. I'd made dinner, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Richard had barely touched it, pushing the food around his plate while he checked his phone. This had become normal. We barely spoke during meals anymore. We were like two strangers sharing a table at a crowded restaurant, bound by circumstance rather than choice. After dinner, I'd done the dishes while Richard retreated to his study. I heard him on the phone, his voice low and animated in a way it never was when he talked to me anymore. I tried not to listen, tried not to care, but I couldn't help catching fragments. "Yes, the paperwork is almost finalized. By Christmas I'll be free and clear. She has no idea me. I was she now, not even deserving of my name." I dried the last dish and put it away, my hands moving mechanically. Something inside me felt like it was screaming, but I couldn't let it out. Not yet. I still didn't know what to do. I still didn't have a plan. Every lawyer I'd consulted had said the same thing. Without proof of what Richard was doing, without documentation, without evidence of my contributions to our life together, I had very little standing. I'd walked into the living room where Richard now sat with his scotch, staring at his phone. The evening news played on the television, but he wasn't watching it. He was somewhere else entirely, probably imagining his new life, his life without me. "Richard," my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk. Not now, Maggie." He didn't even look up. "Yes, now, please. We keep saying tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. I need to talk to you about—" I said not now. His voice cracked like a whip, and finally he looked at me, really looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't love or even indifference. It was contempt. Pure, undisguised contempt. "God, do you ever stop? Do you ever just give it a rest? I've had a long day, Maggie. I'm tired. I don't need you nagging me the second I walk in the door." "I'm not nagging. I'm trying to have a conversation with my husband." "About what?" "About your feelings. About how you need more attention. About how I don't appreciate you enough." He stood up, and I instinctively took a step back. Richard had never been physically violent, but there was something in his posture now that frightened me. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is, Maggie? 40 years of coming home to someone who needs constant reassurance, constant validation. Someone who's never contributed anything meaningful, but expects to be treated like she's irreplaceable." The words hit me like physical blows. "Richard, that's not fair. I raised our children. I supported your career. You did what any wife does. What you were supposed to do. and I've paid for it, haven't I? This house, your car, your clothes, your credit cards. Every single thing you have is because of me. Because of my work, my success, and you act like you're entitled to it, like you earned it. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I was your partner. We built this life together. No, he moved closer and I could smell the scotch on his breath. I built this life. You just lived in it. And you know what your problem is, Maggie. You've never understood how good you have it. You've never had to work for anything, never had to struggle, never had to prove your worth in the real world. Maybe it's time you learned what life is actually like. What are you talking about? Take off your wedding ring. I stared at him. What? You heard me. Take it off. Right now. Richard, you're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. You think you're entitled to this life, to everything I've provided. So let's see how you do without it. Take off the ring. Take off those expensive earrings I bought you. That necklace, all of it. Take it off and get out. Get out. This is my home. Eyes it. His smile was cruel. Your name isn't on the deed, Maggie. I checked. It's my house, my property, and right now, I'm telling you to leave. The room seemed to tilt. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You want to have this conversation? Fine. Let's have it. You're nothing without me. You have nothing without me, so prove me wrong. Go on, walk out that door and see how far you get. Outside, I could hear the rain intensifying, wind howling against the windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Richard, please. This is insane. It's storming outside. Which is perfect, because maybe if you stand out there long enough, you'll finally understand what you are without me protecting you. Maybe you'll develop some gratitude for once in your pathetic life. I'm not going out in that storm. Then I'll help you. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firmly enough to propel me toward the front door. I tried to pull away, but he was stronger. He'd always been stronger.
Richard, stop! Stop it!
He opened the front door, and the rain immediately swept in, cold and brutal. This is your lesson, Maggie. This is what life looks like when you don't have me. Please. He pushed me out onto the porch and slammed the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt click into place. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to process what had just happened. The rain soaked through my thin cardigan immediately, plastering my clothes to my skin. My hair, which I'd had styled at the salon just that morning, hung in wet ropes around my face. Water dripped into my eyes, mixing with tears I could no longer hold back. I pounded on the door. Richard! Richard, open this door, please! Through the front window. I could see him. He'd returned to his chair, picked up his scotch, and was scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened, as if his wife of 40 years wasn't standing in the freezing rain, begging to be let back into her own home. I don't know how long I stood there pounding on that door. Long enough for my hands to go numb. Long enough for my whole body to start shaking. Long enough to realize that Richard wasn't going to let me back in. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. This was the man I'd loved since I was 27 years old. The man I'd built a life with, raised children with, grown old beside. And here he was, teaching me a lesson, like I was a disobedient child rather than his wife. I moved to the side of the porch, trying to get under the overhang where the rain wasn't quite as brutal. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My phone, it was inside, on the kitchen counter. I had no way to call for help, no way to reach my children, nothing. I could go to a neighbor's house, and Mrs. Chen across the street, maybe, or the Hendersons next door on the other side. But the thought of standing on their doorstep, dripping wet, having to explain why my husband had locked me out, the humiliation of it was almost worse than the cold. Almost. I was seriously considering it, seriously considering swallowing my pride and asking for help, when I heard a voice cutting through the rain. Maggie. My God, Maggie! Is that you? I looked up to see Elena Rodriguez running across her lawn toward me. She was holding a large umbrella, and she looked absolutely horrified. What are you doing out here? You're soaking wet. She reached the porch and immediately held the umbrella over both of us. Come on, let's get you inside. I can't. My voice came out as a croak. I don't want to impose. Don't be ridiculous. You're coming with me right now. She put an arm around my shoulders, and I was too cold and too broken to resist. She led me across the lawn to her house, through her front door, into warmth and light and safety. I was shaking so violently that my teeth were chattering. Bathroom is upstairs, first door on the right, Elena said, her voice calm but urgent. There are clean towels under the sink. I'm going to get you some dry clothes. Can you manage the stairs?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. In her bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My makeup had run down my face in dark streaks. My hair was plastered to my skull. My clothes clung to me like a second skin. I looked like a drowned rat. I looked like everything Richard had accused me of being: pathetic, weak, worthless. But as I stared at that ruined reflection, something else flickered to life behind my eyes. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Anger. Not the quiet, swallowed-down frustration I'd been feeling for weeks. Real anger. The kind that burns hot and bright and refuses to be extinguished. Richard had done this to me. He'd humiliated me, terrorized me, treated me like garbage he could throw out when he was done with it. And I'd let him. For 40 years I'd let him make me smaller and smaller until I'd almost disappeared completely. Well, maybe it was time to reappear. Elena knocked on the door. "Maggie, I've got sweatpants and a sweater out here for you. Take your time." I stripped off my wet clothes and dried myself with one of Elena's plush towels. The clothes she'd left were too big, but they were warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, I found Elena in the kitchen, making tea. "Sit," she said, pointing to the kitchen table. "You need to warm up." I sat. Elena brought over 2 mugs of tea and sat across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, very quietly, she asked, "What happened, Maggie?" And for the first time in 40 years, I told the truth. I told her everything. Elena listened without interrupting. She didn't gasp or make sympathetic noises or offer platitudes. She just listened, her dark eyes steady on mine, her lawyer's mind clearly working behind that calm expression. When I finished, my tea had gone cold and my voice was hoarse from talking. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping at my eyes. "I shouldn't have dumped all of this on you. We barely know each other, and here I am." "Stop." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't apologize, not for this. Not ever for this." She paused, then asked, "Maggie, did you know I was filming?" My heart skipped. "What?" "I have a security camera on my front porch. It covers part of your driveway and your front door. I installed it last week after someone's car got broken into down the street." She pulled out her phone and turned it toward me. "I was reviewing the footage when I saw you outside. That's why I came out. But the camera, Maggie, it recorded everything. On the small screen, I could see it all playing out like a nightmare. Richard grabbing my arm, him pushing me out the door, me pounding on the door, begging to be let in, him visible through the window, ignoring me, sipping his drink. The timestamp showed I'd been out there for 17 minutes before Elena came to get me. 17 minutes, it had felt like hours. "This is evidence," Elena said quietly. "This is domestic abuse, Maggie, elder abuse specifically. And I have it on video. He didn't hit me," I said automatically, still making excuses for him even after everything. "He doesn't have to. He forcibly removed you from your home during a dangerous storm and refused you entry. He isolated you without means of communication or shelter. That's abuse, Maggie. Legal, documentable abuse." She set down her phone and leaned forward. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you safe in that house? Was I safe?" The question seemed absurd. Richard had never raised a hand to me in 40 years of marriage. But tonight, he'd done something that felt worse than a physical blow. He'd shown me exactly how little I meant to him. He'd demonstrated his power over me, his control, his willingness to hurt me to make a point. "I don't know," I whispered. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're staying here tonight. Tomorrow we're going to talk to a lawyer, a friend of mine who specializes in family law and elder abuse cases. And then you're going to decide what you want to do next. Not what you think you should do. Not what would be easiest or cause the least trouble. What you actually want. I don't know what I want anymore. That's okay. You'll figure it out. But tonight, you're safe, you're warm, and you're not alone. That's enough for now." She set me up in her guest room with fresh sheets and extra blankets. "If you need anything, I'm right across the hall," she said. "And Maggie, you did nothing wrong. I need you to know that. Whatever he told you, whatever he made you believe, none of this is your fault." After she left, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain against the windows. My phone. I still didn't have my phone. Richard would see that I hadn't come home. Maybe he'd worry. Maybe he'd feel guilty. Maybe he'd realize what he'd done and come looking for me. But I knew he wouldn't. The man who would do that wasn't the man I'd married. Maybe he never had been. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The rain, the locked door, Richard's contemptuous face through the window. There was a soft knock on the door. Maggie, are you awake? I've got coffee if you want it. I found Elena in the kitchen, already dressed for work in a sharp pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. But when she saw me, she smiled warmly. How did you sleep? Better than I expected, I admitted. Good, I've already called my friend. Her name is Patricia Chen and she's brilliant. She can see us this afternoon at 3. I've also called into work to let them know I'll be out this morning. She poured me a cup of coffee. Now, we need to get you some things from your house. Phone, medications, clothes, important documents. Do you think Richard will be there? He usually goes to the office by 8. Okay, I'll go with you. We'll be quick, in and out, but I want you to get everything you might need. Checkbooks, bank statements, any paperwork you can find relating to assets or property. Can you do that? I nodded, feeling like I was in a dream. Or maybe I was finally waking up after years of sleepwalking through my own life. At 9 o'clock we walked across the lawn to my house. My house. Except it wasn't mine, was it? Richard had made that very clear. I used my key to open the front door, half expecting it not to work, but it turned smoothly. The house was silent. Richard's car was gone. On the kitchen counter, I found my phone plugged in. Richard must have put it there. There were no missed calls, no texts. He hadn't even checked to see if I was okay. But there was a note, written in his angular handwriting. Maggie, I hope you learned something last night. Don't make me teach you again. Elena, read it over my shoulder. May I keep this? I handed it to her wordlessly. We moved quickly through the house. I grabbed clothes, toiletries, my medications. In Richard's study I found the file folder with the divorce papers still sitting on his desk. There were new documents now, updated financial statements, correspondence with his attorney about finalizing the asset protection strategy. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands surprisingly steady. In our bedroom, I opened my jewelry box. Most of the pieces Richard had given me over the years, anniversary gifts, birthday presents, Christmas surprises. They'd meant something once. Now they just felt like the price he'd paid for 40 years of service. I left them all except for one piece, my grandmother's pearls. She'd given them to me on my wedding day, told me they'd bring me luck and love. She'd been wrong about the love, but maybe the luck was just delayed. We were back at Elena's house within 30 minutes. I felt like a fugitive, looking over my shoulder expecting Richard to appear at any moment. But we made it safely, and Elena locked the door behind us. You did great, she said. Now we wait for this afternoon. In the meantime, is there anyone you want to call? Your children, my children. Michael, 38, living in Seattle with his wife and 2 kids. Sarah, 35, a doctor in Boston, married to another doctor. And Daniel, the baby, at 32, working for a tech company in Austin. They were all so busy, so successful, living their own lives. We talked every few weeks, exchanged texts, saw each other at holidays. Richard had always discouraged more frequent contact. They have their own lives, Maggie. We can't be clingy parents. I don't want to bother them, I said. Elena gave me a look. Maggie, your husband locked you out of your house in a storm, and has been planning to divorce you and take everything. I don't think updating your children on that situation counts as bothering them. She was right. Of course she was right. But the habit of protecting Richard, of keeping up appearances, of not making waves, it was so deeply ingrained that breaking it felt like breaking bones. I called Michael first. He picked up on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. Hey, Mom. What's up? I'm actually in a meeting. Can I call you back? Michael, my voice cracked. I need to talk to you. It's important. His tone changed immediately. Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay? And then I was telling him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The divorce papers, the hidden assets, last night's storm, all of it. Alana had quietly left the room to give me privacy, but I could hear her moving around in the kitchen, giving me space but staying close. I'm getting on a plane, Michael said when I finished. His voice was tight with anger. Today. I'll be there by tonight. Michael, you don't have to. Mom, stop. Just stop. You're my mother. You think I'm going to let you go through this alone? I'll call Sarah and Daniel. We'll all be there. And Dad. He broke off, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. Dad is going to regret this. I promise you that. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. My children were coming. All 3 of them, dropping everything, flying across the country because their mother needed them. When was the last time I'd let them know I needed anything? When was the last time I'd allowed myself to be anything other than the strong, capable, endlessly giving mother who never needed help? Elena came back into the room. How did it go? Coming, all of them, tonight. Good. That's exactly what should happen. She sat down beside me. Maggie, I want to prepare you for this afternoon. Patricia is going to ask you some hard questions. About your marriage, about your finances, about what you want out of all this. She's not going to judge you, but she needs to know everything to help you effectively. Can you handle that? Could I? I didn't know. But I knew I had to try. For my children, who were dropping everything to support me. For Elena, who'd taken in a near stranger and was using her considerable skills to help me. And most of all, for myself. For the woman I used to be, before 40 years of marriage had worn her down to nothing. For the woman I might still become, if I was brave enough to fight for her. Yes, I said. I can handle it. That afternoon, we met with Patricia Chen in her downtown office. She was a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. Alana had already sent her the video footage and photos of Richard's documents. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mrs. Thompson, Maggie, I'm going to be very honest with you. Your husband has been planning this for a long time, and he's been strategic about it. But he's also made some critical mistakes. What kind of mistakes? I asked. First, that video. That's not just evidence of abuse, it's evidence of character. No judge is going to look kindly on a man who forced his elderly wife out into a dangerous storm. Second, these documents. She tapped the printouts I'd brought. He's been moving assets, but he's left a paper trail, a very clear paper trail. And third, he's underestimated you. What do you mean? He thinks you're helpless. That you'll just accept whatever settlement he offers because you don't know any better and you're too afraid to fight. But you're here, aren't you? You're documenting everything. You've got witnesses, evidence, and one of the best immigration attorneys in the state vouching for your character. She smiled. Maggie, you're not helpless. You're dangerous. And I think it's time we showed your husband exactly how dangerous you can be. For the first time since I'd found those divorce papers, I felt something other than fear or despair. I felt hope. Michael arrived first, just after 7 that evening. I heard the doorbell ring and opened Elena's front door to find my oldest son standing there, his face a mixture of fury and concern. He'd clearly come straight from the airport. His carry-on bag was still slung over his shoulder, and his tie was loosened like he'd been pulling at it on the plane. Mom! That one word. And then his arms were around me, and I was crying into his shoulder like I used to when he was a little boy and had scraped his knee or lost a toy. Except now he was the one holding me up, his grip tight and protective. I'm okay, I said, even though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. No, you're not, but you will be. He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, studying my face. Where is he? Is he at the house? Michael? Because if he is, I'm going over there right now, and I'm going to tell him exactly what I think of a man who treats his wife like that. Your father isn't home, Elena said from behind me. I'd almost forgotten she was there. And I'm Elena Rodriguez, Maggie's neighbor and friend. Michael shook her hand. Thank you for taking care of my mother, for being there when, his voice cracked, when we weren't. You're here now? Elena said simply. That's what matters. Sarah and Daniel arrived within an hour of each other. Sarah came in like a storm herself, her doctor's efficiency taking over as she checked me over, looking for injuries, asking questions about my health. Daniel, my baby, just held me and cried. He'd always been the sensitive one, the one who felt everything deeply. We gathered in Elena's living room, and I told them the whole story again. This time, Elena played the video. I watched my children's faces as they saw their father push me out into the rain, saw me pounding on the door, saw him ignore me from his comfortable chair inside. Michael's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Sarah had gone very still, the way she did when delivering bad news to patients, professional, controlled, but I could see the rage burning behind her eyes. Daniel made a sound like he'd been punched. I'm going to kill him, Michael said flatly. I'm actually going to kill him? No, you're not, I said, because I need you here with me, not in jail for murder. Mom, how long has this been going on? Sarah asked. The emotional abuse, the manipulation, this didn't start last night, did it? Had it? I tried to think back, to pinpoint when Richard had changed from the man I'd married to the man who'd locked me out in a storm. But there was no single moment, no clear line. It had been gradual, so slow and subtle that I'd adjusted to each small cruelty without recognizing the pattern. I don't know, I admitted. Years maybe, or maybe it was always there, and I just didn't see it. You saw what you wanted to see, Daniel said softly. Because you loved him, because you believed in him. That's not a weakness, Mom. That's who you are. But maybe it was time to be someone different. Someone who loved herself as much as she'd loved everyone else. Someone who believed she deserved better than scraps of affection and conditional approval. What's the plan? Michael asked, his business mind taking over. What are we going to do? I looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Tomorrow, we meet with Patricia Chen again. She's the lawyer Elena connected me with. We're going to file for divorce. And we're going to make sure I'm protected. What about tonight? Sarah asked. I see just over there, in the house, acting like nothing happened. I don't know. I haven't heard from him. As if summoned by the mention of him, my phone buzzed with a text. From Richard. Maggie, where are you? It's late, and you're not home. I'm concerned. I showed the message to my children. Michael made a noise of disgust. He's concerned. After what he did, he has the audacity to say he's concerned. Don't respond, Sarah said immediately. Not yet, let him worry. Let him wonder. But another text came through. Maggie, please. Can we talk? I know I was harsh last night, but you have to understand the stress I'm under. Call me harsh? He'd called forcing me out into a storm harsh. As if it were a slightly stern conversation, a raised voice, a moment of lost temper. He doesn't even think he did anything wrong, Daniel said, reading over my shoulder. Look at that. You have to understand the stress I'm under. It's your fault he abused you, because he was stressed. I'd heard that tone from Richard 1,000 times over the years. The implication that I needed to be more understanding, more accommodating, more grateful. That whatever he did was justified by the pressures he faced, the burdens he carried. And I'd accepted it every time, made excuses for him, blamed myself for not being enough. I'm going to respond, I said. Mom, Sarah started. I know. But he needs to know I'm safe. And I need to. I paused, trying to find the words. I need to stop being afraid of him. I typed out a message. I'm safe. I'm with the children. We'll talk tomorrow. His response came within seconds. The children. They're there. Maggie, don't involve them in this. This is between us. Of course he didn't want the children involved. Because they'd see through him. They'd see what he'd been doing, what he'd become. They'd stand between him and his carefully constructed plans. Too late, I typed back. They're already involved. I turned off my phone before he could respond again. That night, we stayed up late, the four of us crowded in Elena's living room. My children wanted to hear everything. Not just about last night, but about the whole marriage. When had I first noticed something was wrong? Had there been other incidents? What about finances? Did I have access to our accounts? I answered as honestly as I could, though it was painful to see their faces as they realized how much I'd hidden from them over the years. How many times I'd covered for Richard's neglect, made excuses for his absences, pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. Why didn't you tell us? Daniel asked at one point, his voice thick with emotion. We could have helped. We would have helped. Because you were my children and I was supposed to protect you. Not the other way around, Mom. Sarah said gently, we're not children anymore. We haven't been for a long time. You don't have to protect us from the truth. And you especially don't have to protect him. She was right. They were all right. I'd spent so long in my role as mother, as wife, as caretaker, that I'd forgotten I was allowed to be a person with needs of my own. Allowed to ask for help. Allowed to admit when something was wrong. Around midnight, Michael's phone rang. He looked at the screen and showed it to us. It's Dad. Don't answer it, Sarah said immediately. But Michael was already swiping to accept. Hello, Dad. His voice was cold, professional. The voice he probably used with difficult clients. I couldn't hear Richard's words, but I could hear the tone, defensive, angry, demanding. No, Dad. I'm not going to tell you where Mom is, Michael said. Because frankly, after what you did, you don't deserve to know. A pause. I saw the video, Dad. Elena's security camera caught everything. So don't try to tell me it wasn't that bad or that she's exaggerating. More heated words from Richard's end. You know what? I don't care about your stress. I don't care about your justifications. You locked her out in a storm. You've been planning to divorce her and steal everything she's entitled to. Did you think we wouldn't find out? Did you think we'd just go along with it? Richard's voice rose loud enough now that I could make out some words. Business. Entitled. Ungrateful. No, Michael said, his voice like steel. You don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to manipulate us or Mom or anyone else. And here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Mom is filing for divorce. She has a lawyer. She has evidence. She has all of us. And if you try anything, anything at all, to hurt her or intimidate her or make this harder than it needs to be, you're going to find out exactly what kind of resources 3 successful children can bring to bear when someone threatens their mother. He hung up without waiting for a response. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Daniel started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. Did you really just threaten, Dad? Yes, Michael said calmly. Yes, I did. And I meant every word. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, we should have asked you this first. What do you want? Not what we think you should want, not what would be easiest. What do you actually want from all this? What did I want? A year ago, a month ago, even a week ago, I would have said I wanted my marriage back. I wanted Richard to love me again, to see me as valuable, to appreciate what I'd given up for him. I would have said I wanted to fix whatever was broken between us. But that marriage, the one I'd thought I had never really existed. It had been a fantasy I'd constructed to make sense of my life, to justify the sacrifices, to believe that my choices had meaning. The real marriage, the one Richard had been living in all this time, was something else entirely, a business arrangement, a relationship of convenience, a situation he was ready to dissolve the moment it stopped serving his interests. I want a divorce, I said, and saying the words out loud felt like breaking chains. I want to be free of him, but more than that, I want what I'm owed. Not just money, though yes, I want my fair share of everything we built together. I want him to acknowledge what he did. I want him to face consequences. I paused, surprised by the fierceness in my own voice. I want him to understand that I'm not nothing. That what I gave to this marriage, to our family, to him, it mattered, it had value, even if he never saw it. My children were staring at me with something like awe. Damn, Mom, Daniel said softly. You're kind of a badass. I laughed, the sound surprising all of us. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent most of my life being anything but a badass. But maybe it's time to learn. Well, Elena said from the kitchen doorway. I hadn't even noticed her there. You've got a pretty good teacher in Patricia. And you've got 3 very motivated advocates. And you've got evidence that most abuse victims never get. She came into the room with a tray of tea. Richard Thompson made a lot of mistakes. But his biggest mistake was underestimating you. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Not in my own bed. Not in the house I'd lived in for 30 years, but in a guest room in a near stranger's house. And yet I felt safer than I had in my own home for longer than I could remember. Because I wasn't alone anymore. I had witnesses now. I had allies. I had people who believed me, who stood with me, who saw me as someone worth fighting for. And most importantly, I was beginning to see myself that way too. The next morning we all went to Patricia Chen's office together, me, my 3 children, and Alina. Patricia had cleared her schedule for us, understanding that this was more than just a routine divorce case. This was about justice, about dignity, about reclaiming a life that had been slowly stolen over 40 years. Patricia's conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I sat at the long table with my children flanking me like bodyguards, and I felt stronger than I had in decades. Not because I needed them to fight for me, but because they were there to fight with me. First things first, Patricia said, setting down a thick folder. I've spent the morning reviewing everything you gave me, plus the video footage, plus some preliminary research into Richard's business dealings. And I have to tell you, Maggie, your husband has been very, very busy. She opened the folder and began laying out documents, bank statements, property records, corporate filings. It was dizzying, the sheer volume of it. Over the past 18 months, Richard has transferred approximately $3.2 million out of joint accounts into accounts in his name only. He's retitled 3 properties, including your home, into his name alone, claiming they were business assets. He's moved significant funds into offshore accounts. And he's been paying quite a bit to a forensic accountant whose job, I believe, was to help him hide assets in preparation for divorce. Michael leaned forward, his business mind engaged. Is that legal? Can he just do that? No, it's not legal. It's called asset dissipation, and it's taken very seriously by family courts, especially in California, which is a community property state. Everything acquired during the marriage belongs equally to both spouses unless there's a prenup, which there isn't in your case. Patricia looked at me. Maggie, every penny he moved, every property he retitled, every asset he tried to hide, you're entitled to half. And because he did it fraudulently, the court can award you more as a penalty." "How much more?" Sarah asked. "Potentially. She could walk away with significantly more than half. Plus, given the video evidence of abuse, she has grounds for a restraining order if needed. And there's one more thing." Patricia pulled out another document. "Richard has been paying 15,000 a month to someone named Vanessa Sterling for the past 8 months. The payments come from one of his business accounts, labeled as consulting fees." The room went very quiet. "Who is Vanessa Sterling?" I asked, though part of me already knew. I ran a basic search. She's 29 years old, works as a personal trainer at the gym Richard belongs to. Her LinkedIn shows no qualifications that would justify 15,000 a month in consulting fees. Patricia's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry, Maggie, but I think we both know what these payments are really for." I should have felt devastated. The final betrayal, proof that Richard hadn't just stopped loving me, but had replaced me with someone younger, prettier, more exciting. But instead I felt a strange sense of clarity. Of course there was another woman. Of course Richard hadn't just been planning to leave, he'd been planning to leave for someone else. It explained so much. The sudden attention to his appearance. The late nights at the gym. The way he'd look at his phone and smile, a smile he never gave me anymore. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I suppose that explains where he's been getting his motivation." Daniel looked like he wanted to put his fist through the wall. "That son of a..." "Daniel," I put my hand on his arm. "It's okay. Actually, it makes this easier, it makes everything clearer." "How?" He turned to me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "How does finding out Dad's been cheating on you make anything easier?" "Because now I know. Now I know it wasn't about me not being enough. It wasn't about anything I did or didn't do. It was about him. His choices, his betrayal, his moral failure." I looked at Patricia. "This helps our case, doesn't it?" "Enormously. California is a no-fault divorce state, so infidelity doesn't affect the divorce itself. But it does affect everything else: spousal support, asset division. Especially when combined with evidence of emotional abuse and financial fraud." Patricia smiled. "Richard Thompson has given us quite a gift, actually. He's documented his own misconduct in meticulous detail." We spent the next 2 hours going over strategy. Patricia would file the divorce petition immediately, along with a motion to freeze all assets so Richard couldn't move anything else. We'd request full financial disclosure, every account, every property, every investment. We'd present the video evidence of abuse. And we'd let Richard know that we knew about Vanessa Sterling. "What we're aiming for," Patricia explained, "is a settlement that reflects the true value of the marital estate and compensates you for 40 years of contributions to the marriage. We're talking about your fair share of all assets, plus substantial spousal support given the length of the marriage and the disparity in your earning capacities. We're also going to push for him to pay your legal fees, which is standard in cases where one spouse has deliberately hidden assets." "What if he fights it?" I asked. "Then we go to court, and honestly, I hope he does fight it. Because the video of him forcing you out in the storm, combined with the financial fraud, combined with the girlfriend he's been paying with marital funds, a judge is going to take one look at this case and crucify him." Michael was grinning. "I like you, Miss Chen. You're scary. That's why I'm good at my job." Patricia turned back to me. "Maggie, I need to ask you one more time, are you sure this is what you want? Once we file, there's no going back. Richard will know, and based on his behavior so far, he's not going to take this well." Was I sure? I thought about 40 years of marriage, of 3 children raised, of dinners cooked and parties hosted and dreams deferred, of gradually shrinking myself to fit into the space Richard allowed me, of becoming so small I'd almost disappeared. I thought about standing in the rain, locked out of my own home, watching my husband sip his scotch and ignore my pleas. I thought about the woman I used to be before I became Richard Thompson's wife. The woman who'd had dreams of her own, ambitions of her own, a life of her own. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm sure. File the papers." Patricia nodded. "Then let's get to work." The divorce petition was filed that afternoon. Patricia hand-delivered it to Richard's office, a small but satisfying power move. I wasn't there to see his reaction. But Michael's lawyer friend who worked in the same building said Richard had come storming out of his office, his face purple with rage, shouting about betrayal and conspiracy. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. That evening my phone started ringing. Richard over and over. I didn't answer. Then texts started coming through, dozens of them, each one escalating from confusion to anger to something that looked almost like panic. Maggie, what is this? What are you doing? You can't be serious. You're going to throw away 40 years over one bad night. This is insane. Call me. We need to talk about this. You're going to regret this. You have no idea what you're doing. Fine. If this is how you want to play it, I have lawyers too. Good luck getting anything from me. And finally, I made you, Maggie. Everything you are, everything you have, it's because of me. You'll be nothing without me. I read that last message to my children and Elena. We were sitting in Elena's living room again, eating takeout, planning the next steps. He really believes that, doesn't he? Sarah said quietly. He actually thinks he created you, like you didn't exist before him. He's about to find out exactly who Mom is without him, Daniel said. And I don't think he's going to like it. My phone rang again. This time it wasn't Richard. It was his lawyer, a man named Gordon Pierce, who I'd met a few times at social functions. He had a reputation for being ruthless. Mrs. Thompson, he said when I answered, his voice smooth and professional. I'm calling on behalf of Richard Thompson. I understand there's been some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Pierce. I've filed for divorce. Yes, well, I think if we all just calm down and discuss this rationally, we can reach an amicable solution without involving the courts. Richard is prepared to be quite generous. He's thinking a lump sum payment, enough to set you up comfortably, and you keep the house. In exchange, you sign a full release and non-disclosure agreement. How much? $250,000. I nearly laughed. Patricia had estimated the marital estate at somewhere around $10 million, possibly more once we uncovered everything Richard was hiding. He was offering me $250,000, less than 10%, and calling it generous. Mr. Pierce, tell Richard that if he wants to settle, he can speak to my attorney, Patricia Chen. I'm sure you know her. There was a pause. When Gordon Pierce spoke again, his voice had lost some of its smoothness. Patricia Chen, I did, I see. Well, this is unexpected, is it? Did you think I'd just accept whatever Richard offered, that I'd be grateful for scraps? I felt something fierce rising in my chest. I was married to that man for 40 years, Mr. Pierce. I raised his children, supported his career, built a life with him, and he tried to steal it all. So no, I won't be accepting $250 and a gag order. I'll be taking what I'm owed. I hung up before he could respond. Michael started clapping. Mom, that was amazing. It felt amazing, I admitted. Is this what standing up for yourself feels like? Because I think I like it. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Patricia filed for the asset freeze, and it was granted. Richard's lawyer tried to fight it, but the video evidence and proof of asset dissipation made the judge's decision easy. Richard couldn't move any more money without court approval. We also received Richard's financial disclosure, and it was laughably incomplete. He'd listed the house, one checking account, and claimed his business was worth only $100,000. Patricia had laughed when she read it. He's lying under oath, she said. Which is a gift because now we get to prove it. I've already hired a forensic accountant. We're going to find every penny he tried to hide. I heard through mutual friends that Richard was telling people I'd gone crazy, that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, that I was being manipulated by greedy lawyers and my ungrateful children. The story he was spinning made him the victim, the devoted husband being destroyed by a vindictive wife. But the video didn't lie, and the bank records didn't lie, and the payments to Vanessa Sterling didn't lie. One afternoon, about a week after filing, I went back to the house to get more of my things. Patricia had arranged it so that Richard had to be absent during specified hours, giving me safe access. My children came with me and Alina too, just in case. Walking through my own front door felt surreal. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, my coffee mug still in the sink, the book I'd been reading still on the side table, the Afghan I'd been knitting draped over the couch. It was like walking through a museum of my own life. But things were different too. Richard's study, which had always been off limits, now had papers scattered everywhere. He'd clearly been going through everything in a panic, trying to figure out what I knew. In our bedroom, I noticed his side of the closet was half empty. He'd been staying somewhere else. With Vanessa, probably. I gathered my things methodically, photo albums, my grandmother's china, books, the quilt my mother had made, all the small precious items that held my history. My children helped me pack, and we worked mostly in silence, each of us processing the end of an era. In the back of my closet, I found my old college yearbook. I opened it and saw a photo of myself at 21. Young, bright-eyed, full of dreams. I'd wanted to be a teacher back then. I'd wanted to travel, to write, to see the world. I'd wanted so many things. "Who's that?" Daniel asked, looking over my shoulder. "That's me. A lifetime ago. You look happy." I was happy. I was going to change the world. I smiled sadly. "And then I met your father and I changed my plans instead." "It's not too late, you know," Sarah said softly. "To travel, to do the things you wanted. You're 67, Mom, not 97. You could still have 30 good years ahead of you. 30 years of your own life, not his. 30 years." It seemed impossible and exhilarating at the same time. 30 years to figure out who Maggie Thompson was when she wasn't someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's support system. 30 years to be selfish, to be bold, to be free. "You're right," I said, tucking the yearbook into my box. "It's not too late." As we were loading the last boxes into the car, a Mercedes pulled into the driveway. My heart jumped. Richard wasn't supposed to be here. But it wasn't Richard who got out of the car. It was a young woman with long blonde hair, athletic build, designer workout clothes, Vanessa Sterling. She froze when she saw us, clearly not expecting anyone to be there. For a moment, we all just stared at each other. This was the woman Richard had chosen, the woman he'd been paying with our money, the woman who'd probably been listening to him complain about his difficult wife. "You must be Vanessa," I said, my voice calm. She looked terrified. I didn't know anyone would be here," Richard said. "Richard says a lot of things. Most of them are lies." I studied her. She was beautiful, I supposed, in that generic way that required constant maintenance. But she also looked young and a little lost. "How old are you?" 29, she whispered. "I have children older than you. Did you know that?" She nodded miserably. "Did you know he was married?" Another nod. I should have hated her. She'd been sleeping with my husband, helping him betray me, taking money that was rightfully mine. But looking at her now, I mostly felt sorry for her. She was young enough to be his daughter, clearly in over her head, and Richard had probably told her the same lies he'd told himself. That his marriage was over, that his wife didn't understand him, that they deserved to be happy. "Here's some free advice," I said. "Richard Thompson is a liar and a cheat. He's been hiding money, planning to leave me with nothing after 40 years. And if he'll do it to me, he'll do it to you. Maybe not today, maybe not next year. But eventually you'll get older, or needier, or less convenient. And he'll trade you in for a newer model, just like he's trying to do to me. That's not. He loves me," she said, but her voice wavered. "Maybe he does. Or maybe you're just what he needs right now to feel young and powerful and desirable. But ask yourself, if he truly loved you, would he have lied to you about his financial situation? Because I'm guessing he didn't mention that he's about to lose half of everything in the divorce, did he?" Her face paled. "Thought so." "Well, you're going to find out soon enough. Richard Thompson isn't the wealthy, successful businessman he pretends to be. He's about to be a divorced man with a lot of legal problems and considerably less money." "Still interested?" I didn't wait for her answer. I got into the car, and my children and Elena followed. As we drove away, I looked back once to see Vanessa still standing in the driveway, her perfect face crumpling. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired, and sad, and ready to be done with all of it. "You okay, Mom?" Michael asked from the driver's seat. "I will be," I said. "Once this is all over. Once I'm free," and I meant it. I was ready to be free. Free from Richard, from the marriage, from the life I'd been living that had never quite fit. Free to figure out who I was supposed to be all along. The reckoning had begun, and I was no longer afraid of what came next. 3 months later, I stood in Patricia Chen's office, signing the final divorce settlement. My hand was steady as I put my signature on page after page, watching 40 years of marriage dissolve into legal language and financial terms. It had been a long 3 months. Richard had fought, just as Patricia predicted he would. He'd denied everything at first: the hidden assets, the affair, the financial manipulation. He'd claimed the video was taken out of context, that I'd been the one who wanted to go outside that night, that he'd actually been protecting me by locking the door. His lies became more desperate and more absurd as the evidence mounted against him. But his lies couldn't stand up to facts. Patricia's forensic accountant had found everything: every hidden account, every transferred asset, every fraudulent transaction. The total marital estate came to just over $12 million, far more than Richard had disclosed. And because he'd tried to hide it, because he'd lied under oath, because he'd dissipated assets in bad faith, the judge had not been kind. The final settlement gave me 60% of everything, $7.2 million, plus the house, plus my car, plus substantial monthly spousal support for the rest of my life or until I remarried. Richard would also pay all my legal fees, which had been considerable. More than the money, though, there was something else in the settlement. A clause that Patricia had insisted on, one that Richard had tried desperately to negotiate away, an admission, in writing, that he had engaged in emotional abuse, financial fraud, and marital infidelity. It was part of the public record now. Anyone who looked at our divorce filing would see the truth, not the story Richard had tried to tell. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked as I signed the last page. "Free," I said simply, and it was true. The weight I'd been carrying for so long, the weight of pretending, of accommodating, of making myself smaller, it was gone. I felt lighter than I had in decades. Richard hadn't come to the final signing. His lawyer had accepted the settlement on his behalf, probably because Richard couldn't stand to face me. I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd aged 10 years in 3 months, that the stress had taken its toll. Part of me felt sorry for him, but only a small part. I walked out of Patricia's office into brilliant winter sunshine. My children were waiting for me on the sidewalk, along with Alina, who'd become one of my dearest friends through all of this. "It's done," I said. Michael hugged me tight. "Congratulations, Mom. You did it." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, any of you." And it was true. My children had been there every step of the way, flying back and forth from their own lives, sitting through depositions, standing beside me in court. Elena had been my rock, the friend I hadn't known I needed, and Patricia had fought for me like I was her own mother. "So," Sarah said, linking her arm through mine, "what now? What does the newly wealthy Maggie Thompson want to do with her life?" What did I want? It was a question I'd been asking myself for 3 months, and I finally had an answer. "I want to travel," I said. "I want to see all the places I always dreamed about but never got to visit. I want to take that teaching course I always wanted, and maybe volunteer at the library. I want to learn to paint. I want to spend time with my grandchildren without feeling guilty about taking time away from Richard. I want to—" I paused, surprised by the emotion in my voice. "I want to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs me to be." "That sounds perfect," Daniel said softly. We went to lunch to celebrate. A long, leisurely meal at a nice restaurant where we laughed and talked and made plans for the future. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't watching the clock, wasn't worrying about getting home to make dinner, wasn't thinking about anyone's needs but my own. Over dessert, Alina raised her glass. A toast to Maggie Thompson, who taught us all that it's never too late to fight for yourself, never too late to start over, and never too late to become who you were always meant to be. We clinked glasses, and I felt tears prick my eyes. But they were good tears, happy tears. That evening, after my children had gone back to the hotel and Alina had gone home, I sat alone in my living room. My living room, in my house, mine alone now, and thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had started with betrayal, with the crushing discovery that the man I'd loved and trusted had been planning to discard me like I was nothing. With standing in the rain, locked out, helpless and afraid. But it had ended with strength. With standing up for myself, demanding what I deserved, refusing to be diminished or dismissed or forgotten. I'd learned so much in these 3 months. I'd learned that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. I'd learned that my children loved me far more than I'd ever given them credit for. I'd learned that strangers could become friends, and friends could become family. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Strong enough to leave a marriage that was killing me slowly. Strong enough to fight for what was mine. Strong enough to start over at 67 years old. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything." I stared at that message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "No, Richard. You destroyed it. I just refused to stay in the ruins." I blocked his number after that. I didn't need his voice in my head anymore, his criticism, his blame, his attempts to make me feel small. That chapter of my life was closed. A few weeks later, I enrolled in an online teaching certification course. I'd always wanted to be a teacher. It was my dream before I'd met Richard and redirected my life toward supporting his dreams instead. Now, at 67, I was finally going to do it. Maybe I'd teach at the library, or volunteer at a community center, or tutor kids who needed extra help. Maybe I'd be terrible at it, but at least I'd try. I also booked a trip to Italy for the spring, something I'd always dreamed about but Richard had never wanted to do. Too touristy, he'd always said. Too clichéd. Well, I was going to be the biggest tourist in Rome, and I was going to love every clichéd minute of it. Elena and I had dinner once a week now, a standing date that I looked forward to more than anything else. She'd become the friend I'd never had when I was married. Richard had always discouraged close friendships, especially with other women. They just gossip and cause trouble, he'd say. But Elena didn't gossip, she listened, she advised. She celebrated my victories and comforted me through the hard moments that still came sometimes. You know what I realized? I told her one evening over wine. I spent 40 years of my life trying to be perfect for Richard. The perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect support system. And it was never enough. He still left. He still betrayed me. All that perfection, all that sacrifice, it meant nothing to him. So what are you going to be now? Elena asked. Imperfect. Gloriously, messily, authentically imperfect. I'm going to be late sometimes. I'm going to burn dinner and not care. I'm going to say no when I don't want to do something. I'm going to take up space in the world instead of constantly shrinking to accommodate everyone else. Elena smiled. I like this version of you. Me too, I said. I really, really do. One afternoon in early spring, about 5 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Richard at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, thinner, diminished somehow. The confidence and swagger that had always defined him seemed to have evaporated. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. For a second we just stood there in the produce section, two people who'd spent 40 years together and now were strangers. Maggie, he said finally. Richard, you look good. I did look good. I'd started taking better care of myself, not for anyone else but because I wanted to. I joined a yoga class, started walking every morning, let my hair grow out to its natural silver instead of dyeing it the brown Richard preferred. I'd bought new clothes in colors I liked, styles that made me feel confident. I'd learned to look in the mirror and see someone worth taking care of. Thank you, I said simply. Look, he stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, for what I did. For how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. I studied his face, looking for sincerity. I found it, mixed with regret and something that looked almost like grief. Maybe he really was sorry. Maybe he'd finally realized what he'd lost, but it didn't matter anymore. I appreciate that, I said. I do. But Richard, your apology doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the hurt. And honestly, I don't need it anymore. I've moved on. With who? The question came out sharper than he probably intended, that old possessiveness flaring up. With myself, I said. I've moved on with my own life, my own dreams, my own future. And it turns out I'm much better company than you ever were. I walked away before he could respond, my head high, my steps sure, and I didn't look back. That summer, I took my grandchildren to the beach for a week. Just me and them, building sandcastles and collecting shells and staying up late telling stories. Sarah had been worried it would be too much for me, too exhausting. But it was perfect. Exhausting in the best way, the way that comes from laughter and love rather than stress and obligation. On the last night, as we sat around a bonfire on the beach, my oldest grandson asked, Grandma, are you sad that Grandpa isn't here? No, sweetheart, I said honestly. I'm not sad at all. Why did you get divorced? How do you explain something like that to a child? How do you talk about the slow erosion of a marriage, the betrayals large and small, the moment when you finally realize you deserve better? Sometimes, I said carefully, people grow apart. And sometimes, when that happens, the kindest thing you can do is let each other go. Your grandpa and I, we had good years together. We had your parents, and that led to you, and I'll always be grateful for that. But we weren't making each other happy anymore. So we decided to be happy separately instead. Are you happy now, Grandma? I looked around at my grandchildren's faces, glowing in the firelight. I thought about my upcoming trip to Italy, about my teaching course, about my weekly dinners with Elena, about the life I was building piece by piece. A life that was entirely my own. Yes, I said. I really, really am. And I meant it. I was happy in a way I'd never been during my marriage. Not the performance of happiness, not the appearance of contentment, but real, deep, authentic joy. The kind that comes from knowing yourself, honoring yourself, and refusing to settle for less than you deserve. My story didn't end with a grand revenge or a dramatic confrontation. It didn't end with Richard groveling or begging me to come back. It ended with something much better, with me, finally truly free. Free to be imperfect and complicated and entirely unapologetically myself, I'd spent 40 years being Mrs. Richard Thompson. Playing a role I thought I had to play, shrinking myself to fit someone else's vision of who I should be. Now, at 67, I was finally just Maggie. And Maggie, it turned out, was pretty amazing. The storm that had left me standing in the rain, cold and afraid and locked out of my own home, had also washed away everything false in my life. It had stripped me down to my core and forced me to rebuild. And what I'd rebuilt was stronger, truer, and more beautiful than anything I'd had before. Richard had tried to teach me a lesson that night. He'd wanted me to understand my place, to recognize my dependence on him, to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity he allowed me. But the lesson I learned was very different from the one he intended. I learned that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand better, to start over. I learned that the love and support you need often comes from unexpected places. A neighbor who becomes a friend, children who become advocates, strangers who become allies. Most importantly, I learned that you can survive the rain. You can survive being locked out, left behind, betrayed and abandoned. You can survive watching the life you thought you had crumble into dust. And not just survive, you can thrive. As I sat on that beach with my grandchildren, watching the sun set over the ocean, I thought about the woman I'd been that terrible night. The woman standing in the rain, shaking and afraid, pounding on a locked door, while the man she'd loved for 40 years looked right through her. If I could go back and tell her something, I'd say this. The storm won't last forever. The door won't stay locked, and the person who's coming to save you, the one you've been waiting for all along, is you. You've always had the strength, you just needed a reason to use it. And sometimes, the cruelest betrayals lead to the most beautiful transformations. I smiled, pulling my grandchildren close, and watched the last of the sun slip below the horizon. Somewhere out there was a future I was building one choice at a time. Somewhere out there was the rest of my life, and it belonged entirely to me. The storm had passed, and I at last had come home to myself.